Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this. Let's see, today is the 26th, Tuesday, the 26th of October, 2021. Thank you for tuning in. Glad to have you guys here. Now, we're going to talk about the shipping, the complex shipping issues going over on the West Coast. And I'm going to read an article here written by Ryan Peterson. And he has actually went over there and examined the situation. It's going to give you guys a really good idea of what's going on. So I'm going to read it, and then we're going to discuss it. He posted this on Twitter. He says, yesterday I rented a boat and took the leader of one of the Flexport partners in Long Beach on a 3-hour tour of the port complex. And here's what he learned. He says, first off, the boat captain said we were the first company ever to rent his boat to tour the port to see how everything was working up close. His usual business is doing memorial services at sea, he said, but this is a lot more fun, he said, than his regular customers. And so I guess they left the port to look. He says, the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, are at a complete standstill, he said. In a full 3-hour loop through the port complex, passing every single terminal, we saw less than a dozen containers get unloaded. So it's almost stopped. He says there are hundreds of cranes. I counted only 7 that were even operating. Boy, gosh, guys, we're in trouble. Just listen to what he said. He said he counted hundreds of cranes, and that there were only 7 that were even operating. And those that were operating seemed to be going pretty darn slow, he said. This is where most of everything you buy is coming into the country. Now, I went to Walmart here in South Carolina yesterday, and I was walking down the spray paint aisle. There's almost nothing there. It was like all cleaned out. There's just like a few cans left. Now, certain items are fine. Like I went through the store. But how long are those certain items going to be fine if these ports are not moving the goods? I mean, the trucks can't take the goods to the stores if the ports aren't moving them. Okay, he said, it seems that everyone now agrees that the bottleneck in yard space at the container terminals, the terminals are simply overflowing with containers, which means they no longer have space to take in new containers either from ships or land. It's a true traffic jam. So what we got here going on here is a traffic jam at the port facilities. He says right now, if you have a chassis with no empty container on it, you can go pick up containers at any port terminal. However, if you have an empty container that's on a chassis, they're not allowing you to return it except on a highly restricted basis. If you can't get an empty off of the chassis, you don't have a chassis to go pick up the next container. And if nobody goes to pick up the next container, the port remains jammed. So what he's saying here, I think that this situation could be ongoing for a much longer period of time. He also said, with the yards so full, terminals are being highly restrictive on where and when they will accept empties. So I guess they're not accepting the empty containers. He also said that containers are not fungible between carriers. So in other words, they can't exchange containers between the different container carriers. So the truckers have to drop off their empties at the right terminal. So they have to get the empties right to the exact terminal. This is causing empty containers to pile up. This one trucking partner alone has 450 containers sitting on the chassis right now as far as the 10th of 2021, so the 10th of this month at his yards. So he's got 400 containers sitting on chassis. Everything's bugging up. It's not moving, guys, within the system. Let's read what else he says here. He says, this trucking company with 6 yards that represents 153 owner-operator drivers So he has almost 3 containers sitting on chassis at his yard for every driver on the team. He can't take the containers off of the chassis because he is not allowed by the City of Long Beach zoning code to store empty containers more than 2 high in his truck yard. If he violates this code, they'll shut down his yard altogether. So we can see part of this whole situation that's going on has got to do with laws that they've got in place, Long Beach zoning laws, that they can't store empty containers more than 2 containers high. Why? I just don't understand that. I've seen them stack containers 4, even 6 high, especially on land. Maybe not at sea, because when they stack containers more than, say, 3 or 4 high at sea, if they get into rough seas, sometimes the containers will fall off into the ocean. But on land, I don't see why they got this restriction of only 2 containers high. They could go 4 or 5 containers high. I just don't understand that. And it's the Long Beach zoning code that reason why they can't do this. He says, with the chassis all tied up storing empties that can't be returned to the port, there's no chassis available to pick up containers at the port. And with all the containers piling up in the terminal yard, the longshoremen can't unload the ships. So the queue to unload grows longer, with now over 70 ships in the queue containing 500,000 containers that are waiting offshore. This line is going to get longer and not shorter. So what he's saying here is this situation is going to get worse because they've got 500,000 containers that are waiting, and the queue is actually growing longer. So what we've got is we've got a bottleneck in shipping right now. Basically like a traffic jam on the highway. You ever driven up and you're in a big long line of cars and nobody's getting through, it's all stopped, and you're out in the hot sun, and there's like the police are out there and there's a big accident or whatever, and they're stopping everybody and they're not letting anybody go. This is what's happening for the whole of the United States shipping industry, and I think you guys are going to start to feel it pretty soon. Says this is a negative feedback loop, is what he says about these 500,000 containers that are waiting offshore and they're not unloading them. He says this is a negative feedback loop that is rapidly cycling out of control, that if it continues unabated, it will destroy the global economy. Oh boy, guys. So this is really big, this, and it's not getting better. I just don't know. This is the worst I think I've ever seen as far as a shipping backlog and a problem in our supply chain coming into America. I've never seen anything worse than this. And it looks to me like what we have is we have a lot of stores out here with a lot of inventory. They were full. But now what's going to start to happen is if they don't get this bottleneck in shipping cleared up, we're going to actually see the stores we're going to see the effect of it. And we could also see people hoarding, and not just toilet paper like during the start of the pandemic, but this time it'd be almost everything, all different kinds of items. He talked about this negative feedback loop here, and then he says, all right, how do we fix this, you ask? Simple. And we can do it fast now, he says. Okay, so he's going to talk about how we fix it. He says, when you're designing an operation, you must choose your bottleneck. If the bottleneck appears somewhere you didn't choose it, you are running an operation. You are not running an operation. The operation is running you. He says you should always choose the most capital-intensive part of the line to be your bottleneck. As a port, that's the ship shore cranes. The cranes should never be unable to run because they're waiting for another part of the operation to catch up. The bottleneck right now is not the cranes, it's the yard space at the container terminals, and it's empty chassis to come clear out those containers. In operations where the bottleneck appears somewhere you didn't design it for to appear, you must overwhelm the bottleneck. He goes on to say, here's a simple plan partnered with private sector labor truckers and everybody else in this chain must implement today to overcome the bottleneck to create yard space at the port so we can operate again. He says that an executive order, effective immediately, overriding the zoning rules of Long Beach and Los Angeles to allow truck yards to store empty containers is up to 6 high instead of the current limit of 2, and make it temporary for 2 days. So he's seeing that the biggest problem here is this zoning law of Long Beach, that they only allow containers to be stored 2 high, 2 containers high. He says they should be stored 6 containers high, and they're having a problem there on that part of the whole supply chain issue with not enough storage yard area to store all of these empty containers. He said if they did that, it would free up tens of thousands of chassis that right now are just being storing containers on wheels. Those chassis can immediately be taken to the ports to haul away the containers. He says bring every container chassis owned by the National Guard and the military in the U.S. to the ports and loan them to the terminals for 180 days. So what he's talking about here is how to fix this issue. But right now this issue's not fixed. It's getting worse real fast. And you know how the government operates. They'll only operate and they'll only do something when there comes to a crisis. And this could actually come to a crisis point pretty soon in the next week or 2 or 3 weeks as the stores start to run out of products. Now, in other news, I want to talk about Janet Yellen. She says now that, yes, inflation's real and expected going into 2022. It's going to continue. They're talking about it coming to an end, I think, in 2022. But the thing about it is you remember they told us earlier that it was going to be transitory and be coming to an end this year because it was only transitory. Now they're realizing that it's not transitory, and in fact, this inflation could actually get out of control. And one of the things that's going to push the inflation is shortages of goods, raises prices. It's just the old situation where of supply and demand, function of supply and demand. So far, guys, everything else has been going up and up and up in price, except for precious metals. I think that we could be in for an explosion price of precious metals. Today, we're seeing them smash the price down on precious metals. It's dropped down below $24 again, and I mean it's just 63 cents down today. Can you believe that for silver at $23.92? I'm looking at it right now, and it's a smackdown going on right now while I'm speaking. Everything else in the world is going up in price except precious metals. I just can't see any other thing except it's going to explode at some point in time to try to catch up with everything else that's been going up. And hang in there, guys, with your precious metals. This is not the time to let them shake you out of the tree. You know what I mean? These 4 big banks that are controlling the price of precious metals using short paper contracts. Hang in there, guys. I can see that. I think it's actually going to be an explosion to the upside when it actually happens. I think they might lose control, actually, of the price of precious metals. Well, I hope that gave you guys a better understanding of what's going on with the bottlenecks in the ports out in California, and how it could affect the rest of the country, because an awful lot of our goods are imported. And you guys have a great rest of the day. Thank you for listening to my show, and I'll be back soon, probably all next month, doing my regular reports. And we'll catch you guys later. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.